Hello, welcome to episode 4. We are going to be going over some stuff. The first thing we're going to be covering is Python casting. And just a quick recap before we dive in. The methods and functions that we know currently are print and type. We have x assigned to the integer value of 10 here. We're going to run the terminal and show you the output of these. You'll see in the first one it's got a string literal only between the quotes, the print method / function. And the second one has a string literal followed by a comma, followed by the method type x. So we are executing that method or function as an argument inside of the print method. If all of that's confusing, that's okay. We haven't covered writing our own methods or functions in depth yet. Just know that the type x right there is actually executing inside of print as an argument. You see down below that the x prints out the class of int. So we've gone over those data types, and we know that 10 is an int, which is a data type. So we'll go ahead and comment that out. Now we're going to cover Python casting. So casting is done. You can make stuff that isn't an int, a float, or a string into an int, a float, or a string. And we'll go ahead and demonstrate that now. So there may be times where you want to specify a type on a variable, which is pretty common, especially if you're using someone else's API or data and you want to convert it into one type of data because you have methods that are built around that type of data, or maybe you want a whole number. There's a bunch of times that you will use something similar to this. So first we're going to cover how you can cast something as an integer. So we have x, and we're telling it to cast it as an integer here, 1. 1 is an integer already, but we're telling it explicitly to be an integer. Y is a float. That 1.1 is a float, as we know. And here we have a string literal, where we type out the char 1. Char or char, C-H-A-R, is a data type in a lot of programming languages, not in Python, but you will hear me call it a char, which is just a single character. So here we will go ahead and print those off. So you can see it, and I need to change the Y and the Z here, just to show you that string literal does turn to an integer. And just so you know, I recorded this video earlier with no audio, so I'm talking over it and trying to remember exactly what I was talking about at what points. So if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments or message me, and I will answer those questions. I also have the bad habit of writing semicolons because I come from JavaScript. So now we will do the type casting for a float, and do this with me. Practice this because this is something that would be good just to have as muscle memory, and it's very straightforward. Unfortunately, I did not print the type of Y and Z, and I would want you to do that. Okay, so really quick, I just wanted to make sure that I can show you that it is working. So you see that I've changed it to X, Y, Z, comma mistake now, and if I execute 4.py, you see that it is a string here, and if we change that to a float or an int, you will see that it will give us the same output that we are desiring. So really quick, you see that it's a float, and if we convert it back to an int, you see that all three are now printing as an int. So go ahead and try this block, and don't worry about anything down here. We will dive into that next. So just wanted to make sure that I corrected that mistake. Okay, so you can also cast to a string. I don't believe we covered that before. So it's int for int, float is the entire word, and for string it's just str, like strength in a video game. Pretty easy to remember. And now I wanted to cover just kind of what the string literals are. String literals are a very common thing in programming. So all a string literal is you specify the contents of a string in a program. So here, the term string literal, that string, is a string literal. You can assign that to a variable instead of just printing it. So you could do x equals, and then the string literal, and that would be a string literal. It can use the single or double quote delimiters, as we've already talked about, and that variable actually points to that string. We haven't covered pointers. We might not. It's not a major topic for Python at this time, but if you look at programming languages like C, then you will deal with pointers. So if we want a multi-line string, just any multi-line string, 2, we will cover that. Sorry, I'm just still going over the string literal here, showing that you can assign it to the variable and print it. And just make sure you are running it in a new file, 4.py. We're using py4.py. The py just means to run it in Python, so that's what you're telling the computer. And just make sure you're in the appropriate folder when you execute that command. So you can see it prints that string literal, any string. And then I will cover multi-line strings here. Multi-line strings can also be assigned to a variable, and you will just use triple quotes, just like we do with the comments, but you can actually assign that to a variable to have a multi-line string, and you can put, like, anything you type, it will carry over. You can even return it here to the next line, stuff like that, and then you will be able to print it just by doing like print y. So we'll execute the method print, and the argument is the variable y. So if any of that lingo is not making sense, you can pause the video and look up anything. Just know that y is the variable. We're assigning this multi-line string value to that variable of y. Print is a method that takes arguments. We're passing the variable y into the print method and function as the argument itself. And that is what is telling it to print to terminal as output the value of the variable y. So I know I tend to talk in a lot of those words and terms, and maybe you don't understand them yet. You will with time, and if you have any questions, just comment or message me, and we will cover that. So an important thing to know about Python strings is that Python strings are actually arrays. We haven't covered arrays in depth yet. We will, but strings in Python are arrays. So you're able to access the individual characters inside of a string using Python with any of the array methods. So that's really important to know if you're trying to figure out how to use a built-in method on a string in Python. Just remember, it's an array. Excuse me. And we'll cover that. So the first thing we'll do is we'll assign a string to this variable x, and we'll just use hello world, the default string for programming, and we'll print x, and then inside here, inside the brackets, we're going to put 1, which means we're selecting the first, or the element of 1, assigned 1, which is not the first, so excuse me for saying that. Remember, arrays start at 0. So you see it printed the lowercase e here. That is the element of 1. H would be 0, so I'll demonstrate that really quick. And just know that when you're printing the individual elements of an array, you can also get the space. That's one of them. And this is just writing out an array to kind of demonstrate. So just imagine that this is how a string is stored inside of an array. This is just storing it as individual characters. So know that. And one of the methods we're going to cover that works on arrays is in Python is called, in a lot of languages they have like a length of. In Python it's just len. And we'll cover that. And this is just a for loop, so we haven't covered for loops really in depth, but we're just saying for each character in the string word. So instead of assigning word to a variable, we're just passing in the entire string, and then we're telling it to print the char, and it will loop over words. So it prints element 0, then 1, then 2, then 3. And that's where you see the WORD down below. Like I said, we'll go into for loops later. They are very useful. You will use them a lot. And in Python, it's really easy syntax to do that. And char isn't, you don't have to use char. That's just a variable name that it's assigning to each element in the string word as we iterate over it. And iteration just means that we're moving up. We're going from element 0 to element 1, element 2, element 3. And in a lot of languages, you would explicitly declare if you're incrementing or decrementing, which means you're starting at the beginning or the end and going forward or backward, typically. And you see if we double print char here, that it prints 2 W's, then 2 O's, 2 R's, then 2 D's. So like I said, it starts at element 0, it executes print char 1, executes print char again, then it iterates up to O, prints char, so you get double O's, then it iterates up to R, print char, etc. So whatever methods or anything that you have executing inside that for loop, they'll execute like that. Now I'm just demonstrating a quick for loop in JavaScript. This is kind of how you would type it out in JavaScript. So you just say for let I equals 0. So you would start it at 0, which is element 0, as long as I is less than x, instead of would be a variable assigned to the string dot length. Then you would increment I++, and that's kind of how you do it in JavaScript. So it's really, really easy and short syntax in Python, and it's very convenient. As you can see, this is a very easy way to get a for loop up and running to iterate over that. And like I said, you can change char to x here, and it will execute the exact same way. So the name of the variable doesn't matter. Just when you're naming variables, make sure that they're something relevant so that your code is readable, because you'll forget what your methods do. You'll come back and read them, and if you didn't name them right, it'll be very confusing. So, as I was saying earlier, a space can be one of the elements in an array. So make sure that when you're looking for a return value, if you are returning an element that you counted to, so in this maybe like you'd count 6 is where the first space is. If you return element 6, you're not going to get the space. So if you type like element 5, you will get the space, and you might be looking for that S. So if you get a blank back as your output, just check and make sure that you're not returning a space in your array elements, because sometimes that will make you think there's a bug when there isn't a bug. And in Python, like I said earlier, we have this method called length. It's len, so we can see the length of x. And we don't really need to for loop it, so we'll delete that, and we'll just print the length of that string. We'll save and execute that code, and you'll be able to see it. And remember that print is a method, and as an argument, we're passing another method, lang, with an argument of the string, words hello world, and it's telling us that that's 17. So lang words hello world returns 17, and print outputs that to the terminal. So that's how those methods work and what they do. Now we'll go over, you can actually test to see if a string is contained, or if like certain chars are contained inside of a string in Python, and this is extremely useful as well. So this is like a check string, a way to check a string. So you can use the keyword in Python to see if a certain string or char is inside of another string. So first we'll just assign just hello, I'm Dan to X here for our for loop, and we'll print to see if Dan is in X before we for loop it, sorry. And that's true, that's a Boolean value. So just know that you're getting a Boolean value back. It's not printing what it is, it's printing whether or not it's in the string. So you can see, and this is case sensitive, as I'll demonstrate. So it's looking for capitalized Dan inside of X, and if Dan is in X, it's true. If with this lowercase, you see that it's a falsy value. So we're getting false back because, again, it is case sensitive. This is obviously useful if you were going to check your database for a username or a password or anything else. It could be a really easy way to just check to make sure that they match. So Python also has the ability to execute it here as like its own standalone method. Like if Dan is in X, then do the following. So we print I found Dan because it found Dan inside of X. And at first it says false because I had the other print method. So we'll get rid of that. Run it again. You see it says I found Dan. So it's finding capitalized Dan in X. The variable assigned that string hello I'm Dan. And because it's finding that, it's continuing. And so it will print I found Dan. If it doesn't find it, it will not execute that print, as you can see right there. So we changed it case sensitive to lowercase, and now it does not print I found Dan. In Python, you can also use the not in command, and so then it will only print something like if it is in there or if it is not in there. So we'll demonstrate that now. So we'll do the same thing. X, hello, I'm Dan. And just to demonstrate it, we'll do the print here to show the Boolean value again. So again, another Boolean output. So lowercase Dan was not in there, capitalized Dan is in there, so we're getting a false value because it is in there, and we're asking if it's not in there. And just like above, we can do this to as like a conditional to execute other methods or do whatever we want. You could put whatever inside of here to make it execute whatever you want. So, but we will use it to do the print method if it doesn't find Dan. So I should actually lowercase that string so that it's more accurate because Dan is in there capitalized, but there we go. So now you see that if it's not in there, it will print that. If it does find it, it just says false because it does not execute the code following the if statement.